Today we are going to go over the basic information for the muscle system. As we go further into this unit, we'll dive a little bit deeper, but for today we are just going to do a basic overview. The first thing that we're going to go over is the general function. So what is the general job of this system? The first thing should be pretty obvious, I hope, is that it's for movement. Okay, and movement is going to happen when muscles contract, and so that's what generates movement. An example of this is when your bicep contracts, it is going to cause your forearm to flex. That's going to make your wrist go closer to your shoulder. The second function of the muscular system is heat production. Okay, so when a muscle cell contracts, it needs energy to do this, and heat is actually a byproduct, not really a waste, but it's a byproduct of this reaction. And so, for example, whenever you're cold, you're going to start to shiver, which is muscle contractions, and the reason it's doing this is to generate heat as a byproduct of these little muscle contractions. The next function is that your muscular system helps keep your posture. So you're going to have, anytime that you are fighting gravity, so when you're standing up or you're sitting, you're going to have a little bit of a partial contraction of certain muscles, like in your back, for example, in order to keep you upright. Okay, so these are the three general functions of the muscle system. Alright, so now we're going to go into the characteristics of muscle. So what makes this tissue different from other body tissues? So the first thing is that muscle tissue has this ability to be excitable. You might see this as irritable. And this simply means that it is able to respond to stimuli, and it's usually going to be from neurons. It can respond to other things, such as like some sort of mechanical force, like if you're hit or something like that. The other characteristic of muscle is that it has the ability to contract, so contractility. So this is the ability to contract or shorten. Okay. And something really important about this is that it does require energy. So for your muscles to contract, you are going to need to have energy. Okay. And then something very, very special about muscles. Right? I have this with 3 asterisks because this is really, really important. You need to know that muscles are always going to pull things closer together. They're never going to push when you contract. The next characteristic of muscle is known as extensibility. Okay, and extensibility is basically just saying that muscles are still able to contract even when they are stretched. Okay, so even if you're like reaching for something, okay, you're still able to contract those muscles to generate movement. And then the last characteristic of muscle is that it is elastic. Okay, every time you contract a muscle, it's not just going to stay like that permanently. Once you relax, it is going to go back to its original length, its original shape, as long as nothing else is going on. Alright, so now that we've gone over the characteristics of muscle in general, we're going to start kind of breaking it down a little bit. So the first thing is we need to go over how muscle is classified. Okay. There's 2 ways, so just like in when we went over bones, okay, and generally that's kind of the thing with anatomy. You can classify things based on its function, so the physiology, or structurally, which is the anatomy part, the way that it looks. Okay, so if you are going to classify muscle based on the way that it works, so functionality, the physiology of it, okay, you have muscle that is voluntary, and voluntary is the fancy word for you are able to move it at will, so you have conscious control, or 99% of the time you have conscious control. And involuntary, which means that you have no conscious control of the contractions of this muscle. The second way to categorize muscle is going to be structurally, so the anatomy, how it's built. And we have two categories, which the first one is striated. Striated is the fancy word for stripes in muscle. So you have basically muscle fibers that are making the muscle cell appear like it has stripes, and this is noticeable as opposed to smooth, where you don't have any very visible, prominent stripes on the cell from the outside. Alright, so now that we've seen how to categorize these muscle types, we're going to go a little bit in depth into the 3 overall muscle types. And then for the remainder of the unit, we're just actually going to focus on skeletal, but we're going to go a little bit into the other 2. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is what are the 3 types of muscle. Okay, so you have skeletal muscle, you have smooth muscle, and cardiac. Okay, and I'm going to be referencing these structures as we go over each type. Okay, so I do want you to make sure that you have as good of a sketch as possible so that you can easily differentiate between the 3 types. Okay. All right. One thing that I do want to note is that here I wrote nuclei and I, boxed it up with this blue pen. And so I then went in and just kind of circled where the nuclei are so that you can see, this is one cell that has multiple nuclei. Smooth, each cell has its own nuclei. And then cardiac, for the purposes of this class, we're just going to go with overall you have 1 nuclei. Later on, if you take anatomy, you'll see that's not always the case. All right, so first is going to be smooth muscle. So this middle muscle type. Okay, so smooth muscle is described as fusiform. Okay, the cells are kind of fused together. It's hard to tell where one starts and the other one stops. And they have this ovalish shape. Okay, so smooth gets its name because it has no striation. So if you look at the other 2, they have these stripes, which those are the striations. But smooth, you don't have any visible stripes, no striations. Smooth muscle is also involuntary slow contraction. So that means that you don't have conscious control over when smooth muscle is going to contract, when it's going to shorten. And whenever it does contract, those contractions are going to be really slow relative to the other 2 types of muscle. And where do you find smooth muscle? Okay, so smooth muscle, I just want you to be familiar with these 2 major places, which one is the digestive system, and it's going to help with the process known as peristalsis. And the reason I underlined it is because you are going to see this again. Peristalsis is basically the slow contractions that your digestive system basically generates or that it needs for the movement of food along your digestive tract. So you have smooth muscle all around like your intestines and your stomach, and it's going to help digest food as well as help move it along through the different organs in your digestive tract. The other place where you find this is around blood vessels. And when we get to the cardiovascular system, you'll see how smooth muscle helps make sure that blood is flowing as efficiently and steadily as possible throughout your body. All right. And then the last thing for smooth muscle is that it is going to fatigue very slowly. So it's going to take a long time for these muscle cells to kind of run out of energy. All right, the next type of muscle is going to be cardiac muscle. Okay, so these cells are branched and striated, and there is a reason behind this. It's so that they can make an efficient pump. Okay, so if you come back up here to this sketch of cardiac muscle, you'll see that, for example, this here is one cell, and you can see that it's branched. And it is also striated, so that means it has those stripes all along the cell. Okay. All right, so where would you find cardiac muscle? Just like the name kind of shows, it is only found in your heart. All right, so, and then the last thing is that these cells should never, ever, ever get tired, or else you know, just think about it. What happens if your heart gets tired and decides to stop pumping? Okay, so it's not going to be a very good day for you if they decide to take a break. And then the last category of muscle is going to be skeletal muscle. You have between 650 to 840 named muscles. Okay, you are going to be responsible for memorizing some of them, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but it is nowhere near that many. I think I just have you memorizing, I want to say probably about 40, just the major muscles. Okay, so how can you tell apart skeletal muscle? What characteristics differentiate it from the others? So first is going to be the shape of the cells. Skeletal muscle cells are very long. They're like cylinders, and they have many, many nuclei and striations. So if we go back to our sketches, so this one tube is going to be just one muscle cell. Okay, and the length is going to be the entire length of that muscle. So you have nuclei scattered all throughout the length of the skeletal muscle cell. It's also known as a muscle fiber. And we'll go into that in a little bit. So skeletal muscle, where do you find this? You're going to find this attached to bones by structures known as tendons. And the big thing about this type of muscle is that it is voluntary. It can be contracted at will most of the time. You know, sometimes you have cramps, you know, so those are contractions that you're not really, you don't really have a choice, but most of the time skeletal muscle contracts at will. You have conscious control over it. And yes, skeletal muscle can and will fatigue, so you can reach the maximum, and so that's whenever your muscles can kind of tire out. Alright, so like I said, we are pretty much going to focus on skeletal muscle for this unit. Okay, as we go through the cardiovascular system and the digestive system, we'll touch back onto the other two types of muscle and go more into their specific organization and structure. But for the remainder of this, we're going to stick with skeletal muscle organization. Okay, so if you want to write that on here, this is okay. So first, you need to understand that a muscle cell is also known as a muscle fiber, and sometimes you'll see those terms used interchangeably, so just be aware of that. Okay. These fibers are going to be arranged into bundles. Okay, so let's say that my one pin is one muscle fiber, and so then if I have, you know, let's say a group of muscle fibers, this is going to now be known as a fascicle. So when you have multiple fascicles, so let's say I have multiple of these pin or pencil groups, this is going to make one individual muscle. And then each one of these layers, each one of these fascicle bundles is going to have this outside casing, this like sheath, and that's going to help form the tendons that attach those muscles to your bones. Okay. If we go back down to each individual layer, each thing is going to have its own little sheath, a casing around it. Okay, so for example, around one muscle fiber, so one cell, so around just one pen or pencil, you have a casing on the outside, and this is going to be known as the endomysium. Endo for inner, and then this part here, mysium, is for muscle. Okay, so once you have a group of muscle fibers, so a group of individual muscle fibers, and you're trying to make a bundle, you're trying to make that fascicle, so around this bundle we would have a sheath that is called the perimysium. And then once you have a group of fascicles and you want to have a casing around the entire muscle, that's going to be known as the epimysium. Epi for outer or top layer, so it's the top layer of that single muscle. So, alright, so what you have is this muscle scale diagram, okay? And so what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you include this in your notes. Okay, so you have your tendon, you have your entire muscle, and this blue section here, that sheath that goes around the entire muscle, is the epimysium. Let's see. And then you have these bundles that make up the muscle, and each one of these bundles or fascicles is going to have its own casing, which is known as the perimysium. And then inside of each one of these bundles, you have individual muscle fibers. So this here that's sticking out is one muscle cell, and it is going to have its own casing, which is going to be the endomysium. It's between each muscle fiber. Okay, and as you can see, this muscle cell is just like this long tube, and it's going to have nuclei scattered all around. Okay, so make sure that you have this labeled and in your journal as part of your notes. And then the last image that I have here on the screen is going to be the different major muscles that you are going to be responsible for identifying. Okay, so if we have another practical like we did over bones, I'll have either a model or pictures where I'll have numbers on specific muscles. Okay, so this is only, I believe, either 39 or 40. Okay, so if you go back to the note, you'll see that there's, you know, anywhere between 650 to almost 850 named muscles. Okay, but these are just the major muscles that you are going to be responsible for knowing. Okay, so once again, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I am more than happy to explain stuff more in depth for you.